Confident Speaking Podcast, where you can learn to speak English with natural rhythm, real confidence, and fluency.
Welcome back to Confident Speaking Podcast. I'm Julia, and I'm here with my co-host, David. Today, we're talking about something that might make you feel a little uncomfortable at first, but trust me, it's going to change everything.
You know, Julia, before we started this podcast, I used to think that language learning was all about input. More listening, more reading, more studying. But after talking to so many learners, I realized we've been approaching this all wrong.
Right? It's like we've been treating the symptoms instead of the disease. People come to us saying, I need more vocabulary, or I need to perfect my pronunciation. But when we dig deeper, the real issue is something completely different.
And it's not just about English learning. This connects to something much deeper. How we see ourselves, how we handle uncertainty, and how we deal with being imperfect in front of other people.
Which is why today's episode is part English lesson, part mindset coaching. We're going to explore why your speaking feels stuck, what's really happening in your brain when you try to communicate, and most importantly, how to break through these invisible barriers.
We'll also look at some specific strategies that our most successful students use, not grammar exercises or pronunciation drills, but mental shifts that change everything. And at the end, we'll break down some key vocabulary that came up naturally in our discussion.
So grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's figure out what's really stopping you from speaking with confidence.
Let's start with a story. Sarah, one of our podcast listeners, sent us an email last month. She said, I've been studying English for 8 years. I can understand TED Talks, I read novels for fun, but yesterday I couldn't explain to my neighbor why my package was delivered to the wrong address. I felt so stupid.
This breaks my heart because Sarah isn't stupid. She's dealing with something that affects almost every language learner, but nobody talks about it. It's not a language problem. It's a perfectionism problem disguised as a language problem.
Here's what happens. When Sarah needs to speak, her brain starts a split-second evaluation process. Can I say this perfectly? Do I know the exact right words? Will I sound native-like? And because the answer is usually no, her brain decides it's safer to say nothing at all.
It's like having a really harsh editor living in your head. Every time you want to speak, this editor says, wait, that's not good enough. Find a better word. Make sure your grammar is perfect. Don't embarrass yourself. So you hesitate, you search for the perfect phrase, and by the time you're ready to speak, the moment has passed.
The crazy thing is, this editor doesn't exist when you speak your native language. In your native language, you make mistakes all the time. You use filler words like and You start sentences and don't finish them. You use simple words instead of sophisticated ones. And nobody cares.
But somehow, when it comes to English, we expect ourselves to sound like Shakespeare from day one. We forget that communication isn't about perfection, it's about connection. Your neighbor doesn't need you to deliver a literary masterpiece about package delivery. They just need to understand what happened.
Now, let's talk about another major barrier, and this one might surprise you. It's the habit of thinking in your native language first, then translating to English. Most learners think this is normal, even necessary, but it's actually one of the biggest obstacles to fluent speaking.
Think about it this way. When you translate, you're essentially doing 2 jobs at once. Job 1, think of what you want to say in your native language. Job 2, convert that thought into English. That's double the mental work, and it creates a delay that makes conversations feel awkward and unnatural.
Plus, direct translation often doesn't work. Languages don't map onto each other perfectly. The way you express an idea in your native language might not make sense in English, or it might sound formal when you want to sound casual.
I love this analogy. Imagine you're trying to have a phone conversation, but there's a 3-second delay on the line. Every time someone asks you a question, you hear it 3 seconds late, and your response arrives 3 seconds late. Even if your words are perfect, the conversation feels stilted and weird.
That's what happens when you translate. You're always 3 seconds behind the natural flow of conversation. And here's the thing. Native speakers don't just notice the delay. They unconsciously start talking slower or using simpler language because they think you don't understand well.
The solution isn't to translate faster. The solution is to start thinking directly in English, even if your thoughts are simple at first. It's better to think, package, wrong house, sorry, and express that simply, than to craft a perfect sentence in your head that never makes it out of your mouth.
Here's something fascinating that most language courses don't teach. Confidence and competence in speaking create a loop. The more confident you feel, the more you speak. The more you speak, the more competent you become. The more competent you become, the more confident you feel.
But here's the problem. Most learners are trying to break into this loop from the competent side. They think, once I'm good enough, then I'll feel confident. So they study more, memorize more, practice more, but they never actually speak more.
It's like trying to learn to swim by reading about swimming techniques and practicing arm movements on dry land. You might understand the theory perfectly, but the first time you get in the water, you're still going to panic.
The secret is to break into the loop from the confident side instead. Start speaking before you feel ready. Start speaking even when you know you'll make mistakes. Because confidence isn't something you earn by being perfect. Confidence is something you build by proving to yourself that you can handle imperfection.
One of our students, Ahmed, told us something brilliant. He said, "I realized that every mistake I make while speaking is data. It's information about what I need to work on. But if I don't speak, I don't get any data. I stay stuck in the same place forever."
That mindset shift changes everything. Instead of seeing mistakes as failures, you start seeing them as stepping stones. Each awkward conversation, each mispronounced word, each grammar error becomes a small victory because it means you're actively learning instead of passively studying.
Let's dig deeper into something that's often overlooked. Most speaking anxiety isn't really about the language. It's about social anxiety dressed up as language anxiety.
When you're afraid to speak English, ask yourself, what exactly are you afraid of? Usually, it's not really about getting the grammar wrong. It's about what people will think of you. It's about looking stupid, being judged, or not being taken seriously.
But here's what's interesting. These are the same fears that native speakers have too. The fear of being judged, the fear of saying something awkward, the fear of not knowing what to say. These are universal human experiences, not language learning problems.
I remember interviewing a very successful businessman who happens to be a native English speaker. He told me, "I still get nervous before important phone calls. I still worry about saying the wrong thing. I still rehearse difficult conversations in my head." Language mastery doesn't eliminate social anxiety.
So when you feel nervous about speaking English, try to separate the language component from the social component. Are you nervous because you don't know the words? Or are you nervous because you care what the other person thinks? Usually, it's the second one.
And once you realize that, you can start working on the real problem. Instead of studying more vocabulary, you can work on accepting that all conversations involve some level of social risk in any language. The goal isn't to eliminate the nervousness, it's to speak despite the nervousness.
Now, let's talk about something that might sound counterintuitive, the power of communicating good enough instead of perfectly. This concept changed everything for me when I was learning Portuguese.
What David means is this. Perfect communication is often less effective than simple, direct communication. When you try to sound sophisticated, you often end up sounding unclear. When you try to use complex grammar, you often confuse your message.
Think about how children learn to speak. A 3-year-old doesn't say, "I would be grateful if you could provide me with some water." They say, "I want water." And guess what? It works perfectly. The message is clear, direct, and effective.
As adult learners, we sometimes forget that the goal of language is communication, not demonstration. You're not trying to prove how much English you know, you're trying to share an idea, solve a problem, or connect with another person.
One exercise we recommend is the Caveman Challenge. For one day, try to express everything you need to say using only the most basic words in grammar. Me hungry. You help me? This good. That no work. You'll be amazed at how much you can communicate with simple language.
And here's the beautiful thing. Once you get comfortable with good enough communication, you naturally start adding complexity. But you're adding it from a foundation of confidence, not from a place of fear.
Let's address the elephant in the room: mistakes. Every language learner is terrified of making mistakes. But what if we completely changed how we think about them?
In Japanese culture, there's a concept called wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection. What if we applied this to language learning? What if your mistakes weren't flaws to hide, but signs that you're actively pushing your boundaries?
Here's a reframe that changed everything for one of our students. Every mistake I make is a mistake I'll never make again. Instead of thinking, I can't believe I said that wrong, she started thinking, great, now I know how to say that correctly.
Mistakes also humanize you. When you speak perfectly, people might be impressed, but they don't necessarily connect with you. When you make small mistakes and recover gracefully, people relate to you. They see you as real, approachable, brave.
And here's something counterintuitive. Native speakers make mistakes all the time. We use wrong words, we forget what we were saying mid-sentence, we mispronounce things. The difference is, we don't stop talking. We just correct ourselves and keep going.
That recovery skill, the ability to make a mistake and keep going, is more valuable than perfect grammar. It shows resilience, confidence, and communication skills that go beyond language ability. All right, let's take a moment to break down some of the key vocabulary and expressions that came up naturally in our discussion today. These are words and phrases that you'll find useful in everyday conversations about learning, challenges, and personal growth.
First up, we have freeze. Not the cold kind of freeze, but the mental kind. When you freeze, your mind goes blank and you can't think of what to say. Example: whenever someone asks me a question in English, I just freeze up.
Next, hit close to home. This means something affects you emotionally because it's very relevant to your experience. Example: your story about being nervous at job interviews really hits close to home.
We talked about having your mind go blank. This is when you suddenly can't remember anything, usually because of stress or nervousness. Example: during the presentation, my mind went completely blank.
Dig deeper means to look beyond the surface and explore the real causes or reasons. Example: let's dig deeper into why you feel nervous about speaking English.
Split second refers to an extremely short amount of time, just a fraction of a second. Example: in a split second, I decided not to ask the question because I was afraid of making mistakes.
We mentioned stilted, which describes conversation or communication that feels awkward, unnatural, or forced. Example: the conversation felt stilted because I was translating everything in my head first.
Break into a loop means to start participating in a cycle or pattern. Example: once you break into the confidence-competence loop, your speaking improves rapidly.
Stepping stones are things that help you make progress toward a goal, like stones you step on to cross a river. Example: think of your mistakes as stepping stones to fluency, not obstacles.
Counterintuitive describes something that goes against what you would naturally expect. Example: it seems counterintuitive, but making mistakes actually helps you learn faster.
Resilience is the ability to recover quickly from difficulties or setbacks. Example: building resilience in conversations means learning to continue speaking even after making mistakes.
We can't forget address the elephant in the room. This idiom means to talk about an obvious problem or uncomfortable topic that everyone is aware of, but nobody wants to discuss. Let's address the elephant in the room. We're all afraid of making mistakes when we speak English. Finally, gracefully means doing something with skill, elegance, or smoothness, especially when handling difficulties. Example, she handled the mistake gracefully and just kept talking.
These words aren't just vocabulary to memorize. They're tools for talking about your learning journey and personal growth. Try using them in your own conversations this week.
As we wrap up today's episode, I want you to think about something. Right now, somewhere in the world, there's someone having a conversation in broken English, maybe mixing up tenses, using simple words, making pronunciation mistakes, and they're solving problems, building relationships, and living their lives.
They're not waiting until their English is perfect. They're not studying for another year before they start speaking. They're using the English they have right now to connect with other people and achieve their goals. What's the difference between them and you?
The difference isn't their English level. The difference is their relationship with imperfection. They've made peace with being a beginner, with being vulnerable, with not knowing everything. And that peace has set them free.
So here's my challenge for you. What if you stopped waiting until you're ready? What if you started speaking before you feel prepared? What if you decided that your imperfect English is more valuable than your perfect silence?
Your English doesn't have to be perfect to be powerful. Your voice doesn't have to be flawless to be heard. Your communication doesn't have to be sophisticated to be effective. Sometimes the most profound connections happen in the simplest words.
Remember, every person you admire who speaks English fluently was once exactly where you are now, nervous, uncertain, making mistakes. The only difference is they decided to speak anyway. Today, you can make that same decision.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Confident Speaking Podcast. If this conversation resonated with you, if it shifted something in how you think about your English learning journey, we'd love for you to share it with someone who needs to hear this message.
And please hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. It helps other English learners find these conversations, and it means the world to us to know that these ideas are making a difference in your life.
Most importantly, go out there and have a conversation in English this week. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be long. It just has to be real. Send that email, make that phone call, start that conversation you've been putting off.
Next episode, we're diving into another game-changing topic. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.
Until then, remember, your voice matters, your story matters, and your imperfect English is more than good enough to share both with the world. Keep speaking, keep growing, and keep believing in yourself.
We'll see you next time on Confident Speaking Podcast. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Confident Speaking Podcast. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to Master English Fluency.